Hello, darlings. Looks like I could use a haircut. Anyway, hello and welcome back. That is very bright. Let me see if I can change this view. Oh, that's a little bit, I think. Welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. Now, if you will allow me to just reframe a little there, that's better. That's good. Okay. Um, Let me now transfer over here to the phone so that we can have viewers. Hold on just a moment. Let's see. Come on. Your videos. Here we go. Share this one. Copy link. Go to the Facebook. Hi, Tori. Gentleman Psychic. I have to do this. Hi, Maddie. Good to see you. Just a moment. I have to share all of this on the social medias because it's only me, so I have to do that these days. But I will be right with you in one moment. Sorrows of Satan. Let's see, we'll do a post. Join me live for story time. And then we'll go back over here to my other page. Create a post here. Join me live for story time. Now we've done that. Thank you, everybody. Good to see you. Who do we have here? We have Christy, Matt, Tori. Very good. Well, I am very excited. I think we may hopefully finish this book tonight. It's a good book. I'm just really excited to move on to other books, to do other things that have to be done. So that is what I am hoping to do. I feel like, though, my camera isn't very at a flattering angle. Let me see. Where can I? Perhaps here. Maybe. No, that's a little high. That chair over there is a little. Lighting isn't as good. Well, that's okay. How's that? I would like it to be here, but it's going to go down to here. I feel like that's. Well, that's okay. I will be reading down to you. I need to have it set up in a certain spot and just do it. Anyway, we'll let a few more people come and join. So Mr. Satan got some new side curtains today. Mr. Satan is my car. My friend Jonathan Grimm made some lovely curtains for the car. And then he's shorting out. So there's some sort of electrical problem, which hopefully will be resolved by soon. Yes, my hair is looking a little. I really need to give myself a haircut. Also, my hair is a little funny too because it's like wire. It'll stand straight up like this with nothing in it. I didn't put any product in my hair today, and it's a little flyaway, but that's okay. It's me. That's what I do. Okay, who do we have? How many people? We've got 6 people here. We'll give just another moment or two so that people can join us because it's a really good book. We've gotten to the point now where we know who. Good evening, Mary Jane. We've gotten to the point now where we know who the Lucio is the devil. That's where we've gotten to. So we are going to go ahead and start without further ado. Also, thank you for all of the likes, the comments, and the shares. It is incredibly important to me. Thank you very much. YouTube likes the interactions, so thank you very much. All right, my darlings, that light is bright, isn't it? I feel like it's better up here, but then you can't see me. Well, we'll go back to there. Why not? That's okay. It's not very exciting. We'll go back to there. Hello there. Hello. All right. Well, my darlings, without further ado, we will continue with chapter 31, The Sorrows of Satan. For one instant, we all three stood facing each other. I, breathless and mad with fury, Lucio calm and disdainful, my wife staggering back from me, half swooning with fear. In an access of black rage, I rushed upon her and seized her in my arms. I have heard you, I said. I have seen you. I have watched you kneel before my friend, my loyal comrade there, and try your best to make him as vile as yourself. I am that poor fool, your husband, that blind egoist whose confidence you sought to win and to betray. I am the unhappy wretch whose surplus of world's cash has bought for him in marriage a shameless courtesan. You dare to talk of love, you profane its very name. Good God! What are such women as you made of? You throw yourselves into arms, you demand our care, you exact our respect, you tempt our senses, you win our hearts, and then you make fools of us all. Fools, and worse than fools, you make us men without feeling, conscience, faith, or pity. If we become criminals, what a wonder! If we do things that shame our sex, it is not because you have set us the example. God, God, I who loved you, yes, loved you, in spite of all that my marriage with you taught me. I, who would have died to save you from the shadow of suspicion, I am the one, out of all the world, you chose to murder by your treachery. I loosened my grasp on her. She recovered her self-possession by an effort, and looked at me straightly with cold, unfeeling eyes. What did you marry me for? She demanded. For my sake or your own? I was silent, too choked with wrath and pain to speak. All I could do was to hold out my hand to Lucio, who grasped it with a cordial and sympathetic pressure, yet I fancied he smiled. Was it because you desired to make me happy out of pure love of me, pursued Sybil, or because you wished to add dignity to your own position by wedding the daughter of an earl? Your motives were not unselfish. You chose me simply because I was the beauty of the day, whom London men stared at and talked of, and because it gave you a certain prestige to have me for your wife, in the same way as it gave you a footing with royalty to be the owner of the Derby winner. I told you honestly what I was before our marriage. It made no effect upon your vanity and egoism. I never loved you. I could not love you, and I told you so. You have heard, so you say, all that has passed between me and Lucio. Therefore, you know why I married you. I state it boldly now to your face. It was that I might have your intimate friend for my lover. That you should pretend to be scandalized at this is absurd. It is common position of things in France, and is becoming equally common in England. Morality has always been declared unnecessary for men. It is becoming equally unnecessary for women. I stared at her, amazed at the glibness of her speech, and the cool, convincing manner in which she spoke after her recent access of passion and excitement. You have only to read the new fiction, she went on, a mocking smile lighting up her pale face, and indeed all new literature, generally to be assured that your ideas of domestic virtue are quite out of date. Both men and women are, according to certain accepted writers of the day, at equal liberty to love when they will and where they may. Polygamous purity is the new creed. Such love, in fact, so we are taught, constitutes the only sacred union. If you want to alter this movement and return to the old-fashioned types of modest maiden and the immaculate matron, You must sentence all the new writers of profitable purity to penal servitude for life, and institute a government censorship of the modern press. As matters stand, your attitude of the outraged husband is not only ridiculous, it's unfashionable. I assure you I do not feel the slightest prick of conscience in saying I love Lucio. Any woman might be proud of loving him. He, however, will not or cannot love me. We have had a scene, and you have completed the dramatic effect by witnessing it. There is no more to be said or done in the affair. I do not suppose you can divorce me, but if you can, you may. I shall make no defense. She turned as if to go. I still stared dumbly at her, finding no words to cope with her effrontery, when Lucio's voice, attuned to a grave and soothing suavity, interposed. This is a very painful and distressing state of things, he said, and the strange, half-cynical, half-contemptuous smile still rested upon his lips. But I must positively protest against the idea of divorce, not only for her ladyship's sake, but my own. I am entirely innocent in the matter. Innocent, I exclaimed, grasping him again by the hand. Your nobility itself, Lucio, as loyal a friend as ever a man had. I thank you for your courage, for the plain and honest manner in which you have spoken. I heard all you said. Nothing was too strong. Nothing could be too strong to awaken this misguided woman to a sense of her outrageous conduct, her unfaithfulness. Pardon me, he interrupted delicately. The Lady Sybil can scarcely be called unfaithful, Geoffrey. She suffers from, let us call it, a little exhalation of nerves. In thought she may be guilty of infidelity, but society does not know that. And in act she is pure, pure as the newly driven snow, and as the newly driven snow will society itself, immaculate, regard her. His eyes glittered. I met his chill, derisive glance. You think as I do, Lucio, I said honestly. You feel with me that a wife's unchaste thought is as vile as her unchaste act. There is no excuse, no palliative for such a cruel and abominable ingratitude. Why? And my voice rose unconsciously as I turned fiercely again toward Sybil. Did I not free you from your family, from the heavy pressure of poverty and debt? Have I grudged you anything? Are you not loaded with jewels? Are you not greater luxuries and liberties than a queen? And do you not owe me at least some duty? I owe you nothing, she responded boldly. I gave you what you paid for, my beauty and my social position. It was a fair bargain. A dear and bitter one, I cried. Maybe so. But such as it was, you struck it, not I. You can end it when you please. The law will give you no freedom in such case, interposed Lucio with a kind of satirical urbanity. A judicial separation on the ground of incompatibility of temper might be possible, certainly, but would not that be a pity? Her ladyship's unfortunate in her tastes, that is all. She selected me as her cavalier servant, and I refused the situation. Hence, there is nothing for it but to forget this unpleasant incident and try to live on better understanding for the future. Do you think, said my wife, advancing with her proud head uplifted in scorn, the while she pointed at me, do you think I will live with him after what he has seen and heard tonight? What do you take me for? For a very charming woman of hasty impulses and unwise reasoning, replied Lucio with an air of sarcastic gallantry. Lady Sybil, you are illogical. Most of your sex are. You can do no good by prolonging this scene, a most unpleasant and trying one to us poor men. You know how we hate scenes. Let me beg of you to retire. Your duty is to your husband. Pray heaven he must forget this midnight delirium of yours, and set it down to some strange illness rather than any ill intention. For all answer she came towards him, stretching out her arms in wild appeal. Lucio, she cried, Lucio, my love. Good night. Goodbye. I sprang between him and her advancing form. "Before my very face," I exclaimed. "Oh, infamous woman, how have you no shame?" "None," she said with a wide smile. "I glory in my love for such a king of worth and beauty. Look at him, and then look at yourself in the nearest mirror that reflects so poor a man, and poor and mean a picture of a man. How, even in your egoism, could you deem it possible for a woman to love you when he was near? Stand out of the light. You interpose a shadow between my God and me." As she uttered those mad words, her aspect was so strange and unearthly that out of sheer stupefied wonder I mechanically did as she bade me, and stood aside. She regarded me fixedly. I may as well say goodbye to you also," she observed, "for I shall never live with you again." "Nor I with you," I said fiercely. "Nor I with you, nor I with you," she repeated like a child saying a lesson. "Of course not. If I do not live with you, you cannot live with me." She laughed discordantly, then turned her beseeching gaze once more upon Lucio. "Goodbye," she said. He looked at her with curious fixity, but returned no word in answer. His eyes flashed coldly in the moonlight like sharp steel, and he smiled. She regarded him with such passionate intentness that it seemed as though she sought to draw his very soul into herself by the magnetism of her glance. But he stood unmoved, a very statue of fine disdain and intellectual self-repression. My scarcely controlled fury broke out again at the sight of her dumb yearning, and I gave vent to a shout of scornful laughter. "By heaven, a veritable new Venus and reluctant Adonis," I cried deliriously. "A poet should be here to immortalize so touching a scene. Go, go," and I motioned her away with furious gesture. "Go if you do not want me to murder you. Go with a proud consciousness that you have worked all the mischief and ruin that is most dear to the heart of a woman. You have spoilt a life and dishonored a name. You can do no more. Your feminine triumph is complete. Go. Would to God I might never see your face again. Would to God I been spared the misery of having married you." She paid no attention whatsoever to my words, but kept her eyes fixed on Lucio. Retreating slowly, she seemed to feel rather than see her way to the winding stair, and there, turning, she began to ascend. Halfway up she paused, looked back, and fully confronted us once more with wild and wicked rapture on her face. She kissed her hands to Lucio, smiling like a spectral woman in a dream. Then she went onward and upward, step by step, till the last white fold of her robe had vanished, and we two, my friend and I, were alone. Facing one another, we stood silently. I met his somber eyes, and thought I read an infinite compassion in them. Then, while I yet looked upon him, something seemed to clutch my throat and stop my breathing. His dark and beautiful countenance appeared to me to grow suddenly lurid, as with fire. A coronal of flame seemed to tremble above his brows. The moonlight glistened blood red. A noise was in my ears of mingled thunder and music, as though the silent organ at the end of the gallery were playing by invisible hands. Struggling against these delusive sensations, I involuntarily stretched out my hands. "Lucio," I gasped. "Lucio, my friend, I think I am dying. My heart is broken." As I spoke, a great blackness closed over me, and I fell senseless. Chapter 32. Oh, the blessedness of the absolute unconsciousness! It is enough to make one wish that death were indeed annihilation, utter oblivion, complete destruction. Surely this would be a greater mercy to erring of the soul of man than the terrible God's gift of immortality, the dazzling impress of that divine image of the Creator, in which we all are made and which we can never obliterate from our beings. I, who have realized to the full the unalterable truth of eternal life, eternal regeneration for each individual spirit and each individual human creature. Look upon the endless futures, through which I am compelled to take my part with something more like horror than gratitude. For I have wasted my time and thrown away priceless opportunities, and through patient repentance may retrieve these. The work of retrieval is long and bitter. It is easier to lose a glory than to win it. And if I could have died the death that positives hope for at the very moment when I learned the full measure of my heart's desolation, surely it would have been well. But my temporary swoon was only too brief, and when I recovered, I found myself in Lucio's own apartment, one of the largest and most sumptuously furnished of all of the guest chambers at Willusmia. The windows were wide open, and the floor was flooded with moonlight. As I shuddered coldly back to life and consciousness, I heard a tinkling sound of tune, and opening my eyes wearily, I saw Lucio himself seated in the full radiance of the moon, with the mandolin on his knee, from which he was softly striking delicate impromptu melodies. I was amazed at this, astounded that while I personally was overwhelmed with the weight of woe, he should still be capable of amusing himself. It is a common idea with us all that when we ourselves are put out, no one else should dare to be merry. In fact, we expect nature itself to wear a miserable face if our own beloved ego is disturbed by any trouble. Such is the extent of our ridiculous, selfish self-consciousness. I moved in my chair and half rose from it, when Lucio, still thrumming the strings of his instrument pianissimo, said, "Keep still, Geoffrey. You'll be all right in a few minutes. Don't worry yourself." "Worry myself," I echoed bitterly. Why not say don't kill yourself? Because I see no necessity to offer you that advice at present. He responded coolly. And if there were a necessity, I doubt if I should give it, because I consider it better to kill oneself than worry oneself. However, opinions differ. I want you to take this matter lightly. Lightly? Take my own dishonor and disgrace lightly? I exclaimed, almost leaping from my chair. You ask too much. My good fellow, I ask no more than is asked and expected of 100 society husbands today. Consider your wife has been led away from her sober judgment and reasoning by an excited and hysterical passion for me on account of my looks, not for myself at all, because she really does not know me. She only sees me as I appear to be. The love of handsome exterior personalities is common delusion in the fair sex, and passes in time like other women's diseases. No actual dishonor or disgrace attaches to her or to you. Nothing has been seen, heard, or done in public about this being so. I can't understand what you are making a fuss about. The greater object of life, you know, is to hide all savage passions and domestic differences from the gaze of the vulgar crowd. You can be as bad as you like in private. Only God sees that, and that does not matter. His eyes had a mocking luster in them. Twanging his mandolin, he sang under his breath, "If she be not fair for me, what care I how fair she be?" That is the true spirit, Geoffrey, he went on. It sounds flippant to you, no doubt, in your present tragic frame of mind, but it is the only way to treat women, in marriage or out of it. Before the world and society, your wife is like Caesar's, above suspicion. Only you and I, we will leave God out, have been the witness of her attack of hysteria. Hysteria, you call it? She loves you, I said hotly. And she has always loved you. She confessed it, and you admitted that you always knew it. I always knew she was hysterical, yes, if that's what you mean, he answered. The majority of women have no real feelings, no serious emotions, except one, vanity. They do not know what a great love means. Their chief desire is for conquest, and failing in this, they run up to the gamut of the baffled passion, to the pitch of the frantic hysteria, which with some becomes chronic. Lady Sybil suffers in this way. Now listen to me. I will go off to Paris or Moscow or Berlin at once. After what has happened, of course, I cannot stay here. And I give you my word, I will not intrude myself into your domestic circle again. In a few days, you will tide over with this rupture and learn the wisdom of supporting the differences that occur in matrimony with composure. Impossible. I will not part with you, I said vehemently, nor will I live with her. Better the companionship of a true friend than that of a false wife. He raised his eyebrows with a puzzled, half-humorous expression, then shrugged his shoulders, as one who gives up a difficult argument. Rising, he put aside his mandolin and came over to me, his tall, imposing figure casting a gigantic shadow in the brilliant moonbeams. Upon my word, you put me in a very awkward position, Geoffrey. What is to be done? You can get a judicial separation if you like, but I think it would be an unwise course of procedure after barely 4 months of marriage. The world would be set talking at once. Really, it is better to do anything than give gossip a chance for floating scandal. Look here, don't decide anything hastily. Come up to town with me for a day, and leave your wife alone to meditate upon her foolishness and its possible consequences. Then you will be better able to judge as your future movements. Go to your room and sleep till morning. Sleep, I repeated with a shudder. In that room where she... I broke off with a cry and looked at him imploringly. Am I going mad, I wonder? My brain seems on fire. If I could forget, if I could only forget, Lucio, if you, my loyal friend, had been false to me, I should have died. Your truth, your honor have saved me. He smiled an odd, cynical little smile. Tut, tut, tut. I make no boast of virtue, he rejoined. If the lady's beauty had been any temptation to me, I might have yielded to her charms. In so doing, I should have been no more than a man, as she herself suggested. But perhaps I am more than a man. At any rate, bodily beauty in women makes no sort of effect on me, unless it is accompanied by beauty of soul. Then it does make an effect, and a very extraordinary one. It provokes me to try how deep the beauty goes, whether it is impervious or vulnerable. As I find it, so I leave it. I stared wearily at the moonlight patterns on the floor. What am I to do? I asked. What would you advise? Come up to town with me, he replied. You can leave a note for your wife explaining your absence, and at one of the clubs we will talk over the matter quietly and decide how best to avoid social scandal. Meanwhile, go to bed. If you won't go back to your own room, sleep in the spare room next to mine. I rose mechanically and prepared to obey him. He watched me furtively. Will you take composing draught if I mix it for you? He said. It's harmless, and will give you a few hours of sleep. I would take poison from your hand, I answered, recklessly. Why don't you mix that for me? And then I should sleep indeed, and forget this horrible night. No, unfortunately, you would not forget, he said, going to his dressing case and taking out a small white powder, which he dissolved gradually in a glass of water. That is the worst of what people call dying. I must instruct you a little science by and by, and distract your thoughts. The scientific part of death, the business that goes on behind the scenes, you know, will interest you very much. It is highly instructive, particularly that section of it which I am entitled to call the regeneration of atoms. The brain cells are atoms, and within these are other atoms called memories, curiously vital and marvelously prolific. Drink this, and he handed me a mixture he had prepared. For temporary purposes, it is much better than death, because it does numb and paralyze the conscious atoms for a little while, whereas death only liberates them to a larger and more obstinate vitality. I was too self-absorbed to heed or understand his words, but I drank what he gave me submissively, and returned the glass. He still watched me closely for about a minute. Then he opened the door of the apartment which joined his own. "Throw yourself on that bed and close your eyes," he continued in somewhat of a peremptory accents. "Till morning breaks, I give you respite." And he smiled strangely, "both from dreams and memories. Plunge into oblivion, my friend. Brief as it is, and as it must ever be, it is sweet, even to a millionaire." The ironical tone of his voice vexed me. I looked at him half reproachfully, and saw his proud, beautiful face, pale as marble, clear-cut as a cameo, soften as I met his eyes. I felt he was sorry for me despite his love of satire, and grasping his hand, I pressed it fervently without offering any other reply. Then, going into the next room as he bade me, I lay down, and falling asleep almost instantly, I remembered no more. Chapter 33. With the morning came full consciousness. I realized bitterly all that had happened, but I was no longer inclined to bemoan my fate. My senses were stricken, as it seemed, too numb and rigid for any further outbreak of passion. A hard callousness took the place of outraged feeling, and though despair was in my heart, my mind was made up to one stern resolve. I would look upon Sybil no more. Never again should that fair face, that deceitful mask of false nature, tempt my sight and move me to pity or forgiveness. That I determined, leaving the room in which I had passed the night, I went to my study and wrote the following letter. Sybil. After the degrading and disgraceful scene of last night, you must be aware that any further intercourse between us is impossible. Prince Reminis and I are leaving for London. We shall not return. You can continue to reside at Willowsmere. The house is yours, and the half of my fortune unconditionally settled upon you on our marriage day will enable you to keep up the fashions of your set, and live with that luxury and extravagance you deem necessary to an aristocratic position. I have decided to travel, and I intend to make such arrangements as may prevent, if possible, our ever meeting again, though I shall, of course, do my best for my own sake to avoid any scandal. To reproach you for your conduct would be useless. You are lost to all sense of shame. You have abased yourself in the humiliation of a guilty passion before a man who despises you, who, in his own loyal and noble nature, hates you for your infidelity and hypocrisy. And I can find no pardon for the wrong you have done to me, and the injury you have brought upon my name. I leave you to the judgment of your own conscience, if you have one, which is doubtful. Such a woman as you are seldom troubled with remorse. It is not likely you will ever see me or the man to whom you have offered your undesired love again. Make of your life what you can or will. I am indifferent to your movements, and for my own part shall endeavor as much as may be to forget that you exist. Your husband, Geoffrey Tempest. This letter folded and sealed, I sent to my wife in her own apartments by her maid. The girl came back and said she had delivered it, but there was no answer. Her ladyship had a severe headache and meant to keep her room that morning. I expressed just as much civil regret as a confidential maid would naturally expect from a newly wedded husband of her mistress. And then, giving instructions to my man Morris to pack my portmanteau, I partook of a hurried breakfast with Lucio in more or less silence and constraint, for the servants were in attendance, and I did not wish them to suspect that anything was wrong. For their benefit, I gave out that my friend and I were called suddenly to town on urgent business, that we might be absent a couple of days, perhaps longer, and that any special message or telegram could be sent on to me at Arthur's Club. I was thankful when we at last got away, when the tall, picturesque red gables of Willowsmere vanished from my sight, and when finally seated in a railway smoking carriage reserved for our two selves, we were able to watch the miles of distance gradually extending between us and the beautiful autumnal woods of the poet-haunted Warwickshire. For a long time we kept silence, turning over and pretending to read the morning's papers, till presently, flinging down the dull and wearisome Times sheet, I sighed heavily, and leaning back, closed my eyes. "I am truly very much distressed about all this," said Lucio. Then, with extreme gentleness and suavity, "it seems to me that I am the adverse element in the affair. If Lady Sybil had never seen me, why then should I never have seen her?" I responded bitterly. It was through you I met her first. True," and he eyed me thoughtfully. "I am very unfortunately placed. It is almost as if I were to blame, though no one could be more innocent or well-intentioned than myself." He smiled, then went on very gravely. I really should avoid scandalous gossip. I really should avoid scandalous gossip if I were you. I do not speak of my own involuntary share in the disaster. What people say of me is quite immaterial, but for the lady's sake, for my own sake, I shall try to avoid it," I said brusquely. Whereat his eyes glittered strangely. "It is myself I have to consider most of all. I shall, as I hinted to you this morning, travel for a few years. Yes, go on a tiger hunting expedition in India," he suggested, "or kill elephants in Africa. It was a great many men who do when their wives forget themselves. Several well-known husbands are abroad just now." Again the brilliant, enigmatical smile flashed over his face, but I could not smile in answer. I stared moodily out the window in bare autumnal fields, past which the train flew, bare of harvest, stripped of foliage, like my own miserable life. "Come and winter with me in Egypt," he continued. "Come in my yacht, the Flame. We will take her to Alexandria, and then do the Nile in Deobah, and forget that such frivolous dolls as women exist, except to be played with by us, superior creatures, and thrown aside." "Egypt, the Nile," I murmured. Somehow the idea pleased me. Yes, yes, why not?" "Why not indeed?" he echoed. "The proposal is agreeable to you, and I am sure. Come and see the land of the old gods, the land where my princess used to live, and torture the souls of men. Perhaps we may discover the remains of her last victim. Who knows?" I avoided his gaze. The recollection of the horrible winged thing he persisted in imagining to be the transmigrated soul of an evil woman was repugnant to me. Almost I felt as if there were some subtle connection between that hateful creature and my wife Sybil. I was glad when the train reached London, and we, taking a hansom, were plunged into the very vortex of human life. That perpetual noise of traffic, the motley crowds of people, the shouting of newsboys and the omnibus conductors, all the hubbub was grateful to my ears, and for a time at least distracted my thoughts. We lunched at the Savoy and amused ourselves with noting the town noodles of fashion, and the inane young man in the stocks of the stiff high collar, and wearing the manacles of equally stiff and exaggerated cuffs, a veritable prisoner in the dock of silly custom. The frivolous fool of women, painted and powdered with false hair and dyed eyebrows, trying to look as much like a paid courtesan as possible. The elderly matron skipping forward on high heels and attempting by the assumption of juvenile airs and graces to cover up and conceal the obtrusive facts of too obvious paunch and overlapping bosom. The would-be dandy and the beau of 70, strangely possessed by youthful desires and manifesting the same by goat-like caperings at heels of the young married women. These and such like contemptible units of contemptible social swarm passed before us like puppets at the country fair, and aroused us in turn to laughter or disdain. While we yet lingered over our wine, a man came in alone and sat down at the table next to ours. He had with him a book which, after giving his orders for luncheon, he at once opened at a marked place and began to read with absorbed attention. I recognized the cover of the volume and knew it must be Mavis Clare's Differences. A haze floated before my sight. A sensation of rising tears was in my throat. I saw the fair-faced, earnest eyes and sweet smile of Mavis, that woman wearer of the laurel crown, the keeper of the lilies of purity and peace. Alas, those lilies, they were for me. Avec leurs airs, des sceptres d'anger, des tresses luminex, prodigieux des séraphines, leurs parfums sont trop tout ensemblés et trop fines. I shaded my eyes with one hand, yet under that shade I felt that Lucio watched me closely. Presently he spoke softly, as if he had read my thoughts. Considering the effect of a perfectly innocent woman has on the mind of even an evil man, it's strange, isn't it, that there are so few of them? I did not answer. In the present day, he went on, there are a number of females clamoring like unnatural hens in a barnyard about their rights and wrongs. Their greatest right, their highest privilege, is to guide and guard the souls of men. This they, for the most part, throw away as worthless. Aristocratic women, royal women even, hand over the care of their children to hired attendants and inferiors, and then are surprised and injured if those children turn out to be either fools or blackguards. If I were controller of the state, I would make it law that every mother should be bound to nurse and guard her children herself as nature intended, unless prevented by ill health, in which case she would have to get a couple of doctors' certificates to certify the fact. Otherwise, any woman refusing to comply with the law should be sentenced to imprisonment with hard labor. This would bring them to their senses. The idleness, wickedness, the extravagance, and selfishness of women make men the boors and egotists they are. I looked up. The devil is in the whole business, I said bitterly. If women were good, men would have nothing to do with them. Look round you at the so-called society. How many men there are who deliberately choose tainted women for their wives and leave the innocent uncared for. Take Mavis Clare. Oh, you were thinking of Mavis Clare, were you? He rejoined with a quick glance at me. But she would be a difficult prize for any man to win. She does not seek to be married, and she is not uncared for, since the whole world cares for her. That is a sort of impersonal love, I answered. It does not give her the protection such a woman needs and ought to obtain. Do you want to become her lover? He asked with a slight smile. I'm afraid you've no chance. I, her lover? Good God, I exclaimed, the blood rushing hotly to my face at the mere suggestion. What a profane idea! You are right. It is profane, he agreed, still smiling. It is as though I should propose your stealing the sacramental cup from a church. With this is difference. You might succeed in running off with the cup because it is only the church's property, but you would never succeed in winning Mavis Clare, inasmuch as she belongs to God. You know what Milton says. So dear to heaven is saintly chastity, that when a soul is found sincerely so, 1,000 liveried angels lacquer her, driving far off each thing of sin and guilt, and in clear dream and solemn vision, tell her of things which no gross ear can hear, till oft converse with heavenly habitants, begin to cast a beam on the outward shape, the unpolluted temple of the mind, and turns it by degrees to the soul's essence, till all's made immortal. He quoted the line softly and with an exquisite gravity, That is what you see in Mavis Clare, he continued. That beam on the outward shape, which turns it by degrees to the soul's essence, and which makes her beautiful without what is called beauty by lustful men. I moved impatiently and looked out from the window near where we were seated, at the yellow width of the flowing Thames River. It's the Thames River. Below. Beauty, according to man's ordinary standard, pursued Lucio, means simply good flesh, nothing more. Flesh arranged prettily and roundly on the always ugly skeleton beneath. Flesh daintily coloured and soft to the touch without scar or blemish. Plenty of it, too, disposed in the proper places. It is the most perishable sort of commodity. An illness spoils it. A trying calamity ruins it. Age wrinkles it, death destroys it, but it is all the majority of men look for in their bargains with the fair sex. The most utter root of the 60 that ever trotted jauntily down Piccadilly, pretending to be 30, expects, like Shylock, his pound for several pounds of youthful flesh. The desire is neither refined nor intellectual, but there it is, and it is solely on this account that the ladies of the music hall become the tainted members and future mothers of the aristocracy. It does not need the ladies of the music hall to taint the already tainted, I said. True, true. And he looked at me with kindly commiseration. Let us put the whole mischief down to the new fiction. We rose then, having finished luncheon and leaving the Savoy, we went on to Arthur's. Here we sat down in a quiet corner and began to talk of our future plans. It took me very little time to make up my mind. All quarters of the world were the same to me, and I was really indifferent as to where I went. Yet there is always something suggestive and fascinating about the idea of a visit to Egypt, and I willingly agreed to accompany Lucio thither and remain the winter. We will avoid society, he said. The well-bred, well-educated swagger people who throw champagne bottles at the Sphinx and think a donkey race ripping fun shall not have the honor of our company. Cairo is full of such dancing dolls, so we will not stay there. Old Nile has many attractions, and lazy luxury on the Jabea will soothe your overwrought nerves. I suggest our leaving England within a week. I consented, and while he went over to the table and wrote some letters in preparation for our journey, I looked through the day's papers. There was nothing to read in them, for though all the world's news palpitates into Great Britain on obediently throbbing electric wires, each editor of each little pennyworth, being jealous of every other editor of every other pennyworth, only admits into his columns exactly what suits his politics or personally pleases his taste, and the interests of the public at large are scarcely considered. Poor, bamboozled, patient public. No wonder it is beginning to think that halfpenny spent on newspaper, which is the only purchase to be thrown away, enough and more than enough. I was still glancing up and down the heavy columns of the Americanized Pall Mall Gazette, and Lucio was still writing when a page boy entered with a telegram. Mr. Tempest. Yes. And I snatched the yellow-covered missive and tore it open, and I read the few words it contained almost uncomprehendingly. They ran thusly. Return at once. Something alarming has happened. Afraid to act without you, Miss Mavis Clare. A curious chill came over me. The telegram fell from my hands on the table. Lucio took it up and glanced at it, then regarding me steadfastly, said, Of course, you must go. You can catch the 4:40 train if you take a hansom. And you, I muttered. My throat was dry and I could scarcely speak. I'll stay at the Grand and wait for news. Don't delay a moment. Miss Clare would not have taken it upon herself to send this message unless there had been serious cause. What do you think? What do you suppose? I begun. He stopped me by a slight imperative gesture. I think nothing. I suppose nothing. I only urge you to start immediately. Come. And almost before I realized it, he had taken me with him out into the hall of the club, where he helped me on with my coat, gave me my hat, and sent for a cab to take me to the railway station. We scarcely exchanged farewells, stupefied with the stupendous of the unexpected summons back to the home I had left in the morning, as I thought forever I hardly knew what I was doing or where I was going, till I found myself alone in the train, returning to Warwickshire, as fast as steam would bear me, with the gloom of the deepening dusk around me, and such a fear and horror at my heart as I dared not think or define. What was the something alarming that had happened? How was it that Mavis Clare had telegraphed to me? These and endless other questions tormented my brain, and I was afraid to suggest answers to any of them. When I arrived at the familiar station, there was no one waiting to receive me, so I hired a fly and was driven up to my own house just as the short evening deepened into night. A low autumnal wind was sighing restlessly among the trees like a wandering soul in torment. Not a star shone in the black depths of the sky. Directly the carriage stopped, a slim figure in white came out under the porch to meet me. It was Mavis, her angel's face grave and pale with emotion. "It is you at last," she said in a trembling voice. "Thank God you have come." Chapter 34. I grasped her hands hard. "What is it?" I begun. Then, looking round, I saw that the hall was full of panic-stricken servants, some of whom came forward, confusedly murmuring together about being afraid and not knowing what to do. I motioned them back by gesture and turned again to Mavis Clare. "Tell me quick, what is wrong?" "We fear something has happened to Lady Sybil," she replied at once. "Her rooms are locked, and we cannot make her hear. Her maid got alarmed and ran over to my house to ask me what was best to be done. I came at once and knocked and called out, and could get no response. You know the windows are too high to reach from the ground. There is no ladder on the premises long enough for that purpose, and no one can climb up that side of the building. I begged some of the servants to break open the door by force, but they would not. They were all afraid, and I did not like to act on my own responsibility, so I telegraphed for you." I sprang away from her before she had finished speaking and hurried upstairs at once. Outside the door, the anteroom which led into my wife's luxurious suite of apartments, I paused breathless. "Sybil," I cried. There was not a sound. Mavis had followed me and stood by my side, trembling a little. 2 or 3 of the servants listening nervously. "Sybil," I called again. Still absolute silence. I turned round upon the waiting and anxious domestics with the assumption of calmness. "Lady Sybil is probably not in her rooms at all," I said. "She may have gone out unobserved. This door is the antechamber and has a spring lock. It can easily get fast shut by the merest accident. Bring a strong hammer or a crowbar, anything that will break it open. If you had the sense, you would have obeyed Miss Clare and done this a couple of hours ago." And I waited with enforced composure while the instructions were carried out as rapidly as possible. 2 of the men servants appeared with the necessary tools, and very soon the house resounded with clamour. Blow after blow was dealt upon the solid oaken door for some time without success. The spring lock would not yield, neither would the strong hinges give way. Presently, however, after 10 minutes' hard labour, one of the finely carved panels was smashed in. Then another, and springing over the debris, I rushed through the anteroom into the boudoir, then paused, listening and calling again, "Sybil?" No one followed me. Some indefinable instinct, some nameless dread, held the servants back, and Mavis Clare as well. I was alone. And in the complete darkness, groping about with my heart beating furiously, I sought for the ivory button in the wall, which would at pressure flood the room with the electric light. But somehow I could not find it. My hand came in contact with various familiar things which I recognized by touch, rare bits of china, bronzes, vases, pictures, costly trifles that were heaped up as I knew, in this particular apartment, with a lavish luxury and disregard of cost befitting a woman, a wanton Eastern empress of old time. Cautiously feeling my way along, I started with terror to see, as I thought, a tall figure outline itself suddenly against the darkness, white, spectral, and luminous, a figure that, as I stared at it aghast, raised a pallid hand and pointed me forward with a menacing air of scorn. In my dazed horror at this apparition, or delusion, I stumbled over the heavy trailing folds of velvet portiere, and knew by this that I had passed from the boudoir into the adjoining bedroom. Again I stopped, calling, "Sybil," but my voice had scarcely strength enough to raise itself above a whisper. Giddy and confused as I was, I remembered that the electric light in this room was fixed at the side of the toilet table, and I stepped hurriedly in that direction, when at once the thick gloom I touched something clammy and cold like dead flesh, and brushed against a garment that exhaled faint perfume, and rustled at my touch with silken sound. This alarmed me thoroughly, more thoroughly than the spectre I fancied I had just seen. I drew back suddenly against the wall, and in so doing my fingers involuntarily closed the polished ivory stud, which, like a fairy talisman in modern civilization, emits radiance at the owner's will. I pressed it nervously. The light blazed forth through the rose-tinted shells which shaded its dazzling clearness, and showed me where I stood, within an arm's length of a strange, stiff white creature that sat staring at itself in the silver-framed mirror with wide-open, fixed and glassy eyes. "Sybil," I gasped, "my wife," but the words died chokingly in my throat. Was it indeed my wife, this frozen statue of a woman, watching her own impassive image thus intently? I looked upon her wonderingly, doubtingly, thus intently, doubtingly, as if she were some stranger. It took me time to recognize the features, and the bronze gold darkness of her long hair, which fell loosely about her in lavish wealth of rippling waves. Her left hand hung limply over the arm of the chair, in which, like some carven ivory goddess, she sat enthroned, and tremblingly, slowly, reluctantly, I advanced and took that hand. Cold as ice it lay in my palm, much as though it were a waxen model of itself. It glittered with jewels, and I studied every ring upon it with curious dull pertinency, like one who seeks a clue to identity. That large turquoise and diamond setting was a marriage gift from a duchess. That opal her father gave her. The lustrous circle of sapphires and brilliant surmounting her wedding ring was my gift. That ruby I seemed to know. Well, what a mass of sparkling value wasted on such fragile clay. I peered into her face, then at the reflection of the face in the mirror, and again I grew perplexed. Was it? Could it be Sybil after all? Sybil was beautiful. This dead thing had a devilish smile on its blue parted lips, and frenzied horror in its eyes. Suddenly something tense in my brain seemed to snap and give way. Dropping the chill fingers I held, I cried aloud, Mavis Clare." In a moment she was with me. In a glance of comprehended for all, falling on her knees by the dead woman, she broke into a passion of weeping. "Oh, poor girl," she cried. "Oh, poor, unhappy, misguided girl." I stared at her gloomily. It seemed to me very strange that she would weep for sorrows not her own. There was a fire in my brain, a confused trouble in my thoughts. I looked at my dead wife with her fixed gaze and evil smile, sitting rigidly upright and robed in the mocking sheen of her rose silk peignoir, showered with old lace after the costliest of Paris fashions. Then at the living, tender-souled, earnest creature, famed for her genius throughout the world, who knelt on the ground, sobbing over a stiffening hand on which so many rare gems glistened derisively. And an impulse rose in me stronger than myself, moving me to wild and clamorous speech. "Get up, Mavis," I cried. "Do not kneel there.
Go out of this room, out of my sight. You do not know what she was, this woman whom I married. I deemed her an angel, but she was a fiend. Yes, Mavis, a fiend. Look at her, staring at her own image in the glass. You cannot call her beautiful now. She smiles, you see, just as she smiled last night when... Ah, you know nothing of last night. I tell you, go. And I stamped my foot almost furiously. This air is contaminated. It will poison you. The perfume of Paris and the effluvia of death intermingled are sufficient to breed pestilence. Go quickly. Inform the household their mistress is dead. Have the blinds drawn down. Show all the exterior signs of decent and fashionable woe. And I began laughing deliriously. Tell the servants they may count upon the expensive mourning, for all that money can do shall be done in homage to King Death. Let every one in that place eat and drink as much as they can or will, and sleep, or chatter as such menials love to do, of hearses, graves, and sudden disasters, but let me be left alone, alone with her. We have much to say to one another. White and trembling, Mavis rose up and stood gazing at me in fear and in pity. Alone, she faltered. You are not fit to be alone. No, I am not fit to be, but I must be, I rejoined quickly and harshly. This woman and I loved, after the manner of brutes, and were wedded, or rather mated, in a similar manner. Though an archbishop blessed the pairing and called upon heaven to witness the sanctity, yet we parted ill friends, and dead though she is, I choose to pass the night with her. I choose to pass the night with her. I shall learn knowledge from her silence. Tomorrow the grave and the servants of the grave may claim her, but tonight she is mine. The girl's sweet eyes brimmed over with tears. Oh, you are too distracted to know what you are saying, she murmured. You do not even try to discover how she died. That is easy enough to guess, I answered quickly, and I took up a small dark-colored bottle labeled poison that I had already perceived on the toilet table. This is uncorked and empty. What it contained I do not know, but there must be an inquest, of course. People must be allowed to make money for themselves out of their ladyship's rash act. And see there, here I pointed to some loose sheets of notepaper covered with writing and partially concealed by filmy lace handkerchief, which had evidently been hastily thrown across them, and a pen and inkstand close by. There is some admirable reading prepared for me, doubtless. The last message from the beloved dead is sacred, Mavis Clare. Surely you, a writer of tender romances, can realize this. And realizing it, you will do as I ask you. Leave me. She looked at me in deep compassion and slowly turned to go. God help you, she said sobbingly. God console you. At this, some demon in me broke loose, and springing to her side, I caught her hands in mine. Do not dare talk of God, I said in passionate accents. Not in this room. Not in that presence. Why should you call curses down upon me? The help of God means punishment. The consolations of God are terrible, for strength must acknowledge itself weak before he will help it, and a heart must be broken before he will console it. But what do I say? I believe in no God. I believe in an unknown force that encompasses me and hunts me down to the grave, but nothing more. She thought, as I do, and with reason, for what has God done for her? She was made evil from the start, a born snare of Satan. Something caught my breath here. I stopped, unable to utter another word. Mavis stared at me, affrighted, and I stared back again. What is that? She whispered alarmingly. I struggled to speak finally with difficulty, and I answered her, nothing. And I motioned her with my gesture of entreaty. The expression of my face must have startled or intimidated her, I fancy, for she retreated hastily, and I watched her disappearing as if she were the phantom of a dream. Then, as she passed out the door of the boudoir, I drew close to the velvet portiere behind her and locked the intermediate door. This done, I went slowly back to the side of my dead wife. Now, Sybil, I said aloud, we are alone, you and I, alone with our own reflected images, you dead and I living. You have no terrors for me in your present condition. Your beauty has gone. Your smile, your eyes, your touch cannot stir me a throb of the passion you craved, yet wearied of. What have you to say to me? I have heard that the dead can speak at times, and you owe me reparation. Reparation for the wrong you did me, the lie on which you based our marriage, the guilt you cherished in your heart. Shall I read your petition for forgiveness here? And I gathered up the written sheets of notepaper in one hand, feeling them rather than seeing them, for my eyes were fixed on the pallid corpse in its rose silk negligee and jewels, that gazed at itself so pertinaciously in the shining mirror. I drew a chair close to it and sat down, observing likewise the reflection of my own haggard face in the glass beside that of the self-murdered woman. Turning presently, I began to scrutinize my immovable companion more closely, and perceived that she was very lightly clothed. Under the silk peignoir there was only a flowing white garment of soft, fine material, lavishly embroidered, through which the statuesque contour of her rigid limbs could be distinctly seen. Stooping, I felt her heart. I knew it was pulseless, yet I half imagined I should feel it beat. As I withdrew my hand, something scaly and glistening caught my eye, and looking, I perceived Lucio's marriage gift circling her waist. The flexible emerald snake with its diamond crest and ruby eyes. It fascinated me, coiled around that dead body. It seemed alive and sentient. If it had lifted its glittering head from it and hissed at me, I should scarcely have been surprised. I sat back for a moment in my chair, almost as rigid as the corpse beside me. I stared again, as the corpse stared always into the mirror which pictured us both, we twain in one. As the sentimentalist aver the wedded folk, though it were in truth, it often happens that there are no two creatures in the world more widely separated than husband and wife. I heard stealthy movements and suppressed whisperings in the passage outside, and guessed that some of the servants were watching and waiting. But I cared nothing for that. I was absorbed in the ghastly night interview I had planned for myself, and I so entered into the spirit of the thing that I turned on the electric lamps in the room. Besides lighting two tall clusters of shaded candles on either side of the toilette table, when all the surroundings were thus rendered as brilliant as possible, so that the corpse looked more livid and ghastly by comparison, I seated myself once more and prepared to read the last message of the dead. Now, Sybil, I muttered, leaning forward a little and noting with morbid interest that the jaws of the corpse had relaxed a little within the last few minutes, and that the smile on the face was there no more hideous. Confess your sins, for I am here to listen. Such dumb, impressive eloquence as yours deserves attention. A gust of wind fled around the house, and with wailing cry the window shook and the candles flickered. I waited till every sound had died away, and then, with a glance at my dead wife, under the sudden impression that she heard what I said and knew what I was doing, began to read. And that is where we are, my darlings, for the night. I hope you enjoyed that one. Always a pleasure, Richard Lale. Great pairing. Thank you. Love your story time. Thank you very much. Very lovely. Thank you, my darlings. I hope you are enjoying this story. If you are enjoying my content, a great way of saying thank you, if you can, is to support me on Patreon. It helps me to continue to do what I do to bring you quality entertainment. You can also find me on PayPal at rlillard6@gmail.com and Venmo at Richard-Lale Lillard. All of the above. You can find me. If you can't afford it, that's fine. You are still welcome. You are still loved here. Still enjoy it. Still share. Still enjoy story time. I very much appreciate all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all of your love. With that, I bid you good evening, good morning, good night,
whenever, wherever you have been seeing this. And as always, I am your host, Richard Lale. Richard Lale is one name. It is not two names. Richard Lale is my first name. Richard Lale Lillard, the gentleman psychic. Good night. Take care.